In the last week, Donald Trump, the US President, has thrown petrol on the fire of the conflict in the Middle East, insulting the Palestinian people and abandoning any pretense that the United States is interested in peace by the disgraceful decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. In the Dála this week, I raised the issue several times about the failure of our own government and the European Union to impose any sanctions whatsoever, either on Israel or the United States, for what is a calculated attack on Palestinian rights and an attack on any effort to bring about a peaceful resolution to the conflict in the Middle East. But as you will see, the responses from the Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Coveney were absolutely pathetic. All we get are words of concern, but no sanctions or no action against Trump or Israel.
And so I think taking hardline positions on one side or the other is not helpful. But I think we do need to recognise when mistakes are made, and I believe a mistake was made last week by the US President making the announcement that he did. And I think we all have a responsibility to try and
will you please get real? Donald Trump's decision to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel was not a mistake. It was a calculated declaration of war against the Palestinian people, against the Arab world and the Muslim population. And if you don't see that, you are living in cloud cuckoo land. Netanyahu is celebrating. He's now claiming that the European Union eventually will accept this and move its own embassies to Jerusalem. And are you seriously suggesting that the Israeli government, given what it has done since the Oslo Accords, in accelerating illegal settlements, in carving up Jerusalem, ethnically cleansing thousands of Palestinians from East Jerusalem, carving up Hebron, literally slicing Hebron in two, to the point that there are now 600,000 settlers in the West Bank, double what there was in Oslo. Do you honestly believe Israel has the slightest interest in peace? And now the United States has made absolutely clear it has no interest in peace either. I've never believed in the two-state solution because it legitimises ethnic cleansing. But whether you believe in it or don't believe in it, it is now dead. Because Israel has systematically flouted Oslo, flouted UN international law, and at what point do you say sanctions become justified faced with that?
I don't accept that the two-state solution is now dead, and I think that would be a hugely negative message to send to Palestinians and to Israelis for that matter, many of whom I've spoken to who do want a lasting peaceful solution. And who are committed to a two-state solution. I have to say that the actions of the Israeli government, particularly in the context of settlements, and the expansion of settlements and the increasing settler population in the West Bank, is certainly difficult to see as compatible with a willingness to negotiate a viable two-state solution for Palestinians also. And I've made that very clear. And the European Union has made that very clear. And the High Representative Mogherini made it very clear this week that EU countries would not be recognising the state or Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving their embassies following the lead of the US. That was made very clear this week by the High Representative. So let's talk about the facts and let's look to try and calm issues rather than inflame them.
Deputy Fenn, supplementary.
Do you think there should be any sanction for breaking international law? The systematic breaking of international law. Do you believe that at any point you think sanctions are justified against Syria? Do you think at any point sanctions should be imposed on Israel for what it's doing? Or do you think anything other than words of concern should be expressed about the fact that the United States has now legitimised the breaking of international law? Do you think it was legitimate to dismantle the apartheid state in Israel using sanctions and boycott? What's the difference? Explain to me what the difference is. What is the difference between the systematic flouting of international law and the ethnic cleansing being conducted by the Israeli state and what apartheid South Africa did. Can you explain the difference? Because I can't see the difference, except for the fact that Israel has done it more thoroughly. Do you oppose ethnic cleansing? Because that is what is being done in East Jerusalem. There's no other word for it.
What I believe we are trying to do within the European Union is to get unity and consensus, which we have on settlements, which we have on a two-state solution, which we have on continuing to put pressure on Israel to ensure that they come to the negotiating table, and we will continue to do that in an effort to try to get an outcome that is fair to both Israelis and Palestinians. And that is what we are working towards. I don't believe that Ireland should put itself firmly into one far side or the other. Instead, what we are trying to do, and what I have been trying to do with other EU states, is to work with them to build strong consensus within the European Union, where I believe we will be listened to, and where I also believe we will be much more effective in terms of getting a response from Israel if we can get an EU consensus on the way forward.
Also in relation to Donald Trump, he has now explicitly endorsed something that flouts international law. Is there any crime he can commit against international law that will finally provoke you to move beyond the statement that our friendship with the United States goes beyond any one president? Is there anything Mr. Trump can do? Because he's now flouted international law and declared war on the people of Palestine, inflaming conflict across the Middle East. Is there anything more than concern that you might express about Mr. Trump's behaviour?
Although I'm informed by the US authorities that many or most of them have convictions not related, criminal convictions in many cases not related to immigration. And the House will be aware that I've appointed Deputy John Deasy to do some specific work on the whole issue of the undocumented Irish, and he's going over and back to DC over the past couple of months, seeing if we can put together something that would assist our citizens there. I don't have any plans to visit Libya.
Now we'll proceed to the statement for the European Council meeting of the. This is the pre-European Council.
Sharing time.
5 minutes
Thank
each.
You. Agreed.
The moral indifference. See you, Taoiseach. Yeah. The moral indifference and double standards of European leaders is really stunning to behold. For the last number of weeks, rightly, we've heard the government and other parties in here talk about the need for no borders, north or south. Quite right. And yet, the border that Europe imposes, which has resulted in 35,000 people drowning in the Mediterranean over the last 5 years, is a matter of complete indifference to our government. I asked the Taoiseach 3 times now today to comment on what is happening in Libya. Not a word of response. In the last week, Amnesty International have produced a report where they make the most damning allegations against all European governments and the European Union. And I will just repeat it for the record, where they say, quote, European governments complicit in horrific abuse of refugees and migrants. They go on to say, tens of thousands are being kept indefinitely in overcrowded detention centres where they are subjected to systematic abuse. They go on, European governments have not just been fully aware of these abuses, but are actively supporting the Libyan authorities in stopping sea crossings and containing people in Libya. They are complicit in these abuses. European governments are actively supporting a sophisticated system of abuse and exploitation of refugees and migrants by the Libyan Coast Guard, detention authorities and smugglers in order to prevent people from crossing the Mediterranean. Slavery, physical and sexual abuse, extortion for money, horrific conditions of detention, where there are now 20,000 people living in these conditions. Not a word. No mention in the Taoiseach speech that this will be brought up at the European Council, and a refusal to answer the question twice this morning, and then, probably because he knew we'd raise it again, he walks out before the issue gets raised. The absolute moral bankruptcy of our government and the European Union is stunning. Absolutely stunning. The other issue we asked about is there going to be any move from our government or the European Union beyond expressing concern and hand-wringing about what Donald Trump has done in the last week, in declaring war on the people of Palestine and the entire Middle East, where Donald Trump has now legitimised the illegal annexation of East Jerusalem in defiance of international law by Israel, where they have put two fingers up to the peace process and the two-state solution which Europe claims it supports, although Israel has clearly no interest in that solution. Since 1993, the number of illegal settlers in defiance of international law on Palestinian territory has doubled to 600,000. We have a 440-kilometre giant wall separating Palestinians from their own land, from Jerusalem. We have 167 different enclaves where the Israelis are slicing up Jerusalem, Hebron, and other Palestinian territories and cities in order to further occupy them in defiance of international law. Nothing done. I ask the serious question. Does anybody believe that the apartheid state of South Africa had a right to continue in existence? No. We all accept it had to end. The crimes that Israel are committing, now endorsed by the United States against the people of Palestine, are every bit as brutal, and in fact have been going on a lot longer than what happened in South Africa. No sanctions, no action. We get expressions of concern. Now, I just ask, when is the European Union, our government, going to find its moral compass and demand action rather than words and crocodile tears about these kind of abuses of Palestinians or Libyans?